bariatric interventional surgeries. He is practicing at SEL Hospital, UN Mehta Institute of Cardiology, Ahmedabad. Also has been teaching at BJ Medical College. He's been awarded 22 gold medals for his academic excellence during his career. And he is the first person in the world to do the vagal nerve stimulation device implant as a part of Antec study in refractory heart failure. He discovered winking coronary sign of ESR on angiography, also called Kamal Sharma of ESR. He's been the principal investigator of several studies like Paradigm, Atlas, TIMI, TIPS, Seraphine, Canvas, etc. He has over 180 publications and he is the only cardiologist who has been placed, like he has secured and he has cleared IAS and IPS examination in the first attempt. Sir, kindly I'll hand over the session to you, sir, please.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you, Dr. Veena. Thank you for inviting me. And it's good to be interacting in this lockdown phase through this virtual medium. So today, my talk is going to be about the statins, clopidogrel. I'll try to talk about the ACC focus and some late-breaking trials as to how they have changed our current practice guidelines with regards to the usage of antiplatelets. So basically, I'm going to touch upon the place of these in managing a patient with ASCVD. And that's what the topic is all about. So basically, as we all know, cardiovascular disease is a leading cause of death across the world, with modifiable risk factors as the primary driver of CV events. We know that up to 90% of the patients with atherosclerotic CV diseases, uh, we need to treat them with antiplatelets, antilipids, and also antihypertensive drugs. In an ACS, thrombus formation occurs under conditions of high shear stress and principally is driven by platelet aggregation. This dominance of platelet aggregation during intracoronary thrombus formation reflects the dramatic effects that antiplatelet therapies have on their clinical outcomes. Now, basically, atherosclerotic CV diseases, cardiovascular diseases, is nicknamed as ASCVD. It's a general term for different disorders. The results that arise from the thickening and loss of elasticity of the arterial wall. It is a severe disorder, can lead to morbidity in forms of and mortality driven by acute coronary CV events or even stroke or peripheral vascular disease. And atherosclerosis is caused by high blood pressure, smoking, dyslipidemia, and of course the damage that happens to the plaques that have formed. Now, ASCVD basically, as we know, the plaque is basically a progression from a healthy state to fatty streak to fibrofatty plaque and to a complicated plaque, which when ruptures in whichever artery it's supplying can lead to the disease, ischemia, and death of that territory. So statin treatment has been recommended for long-term benefits in patients with CAD and ACS. The benefits of statins in ACS, they should begin early, and there should be substantial lowering as been recommended to bring down the levels to less than half of the baseline once an ASCVD happens. So these might include the benefits that statins give, not just by lipid lowering, but they may because of the pleiotropic effects that may exist, which includes inflammatory effects, improvement of the endothelial function, or decrease in the oxidative stress, or even inhibition of thrombogenic response. And hence, the statins have been beneficial when they have started pre-treatment, even from day 7 prior to just PCI. And even in acute coronary syndrome, people have loaded patients with the acute events with the statins for the same. So lipid management and recommendation for statin therapy include that any adequate statin dose should be employed, which reduces LDLs to less than 100 and achieves at least 30% lowering in intermediate group of patients or intermediate risk patients. But it would be reasonable to achieve less than 50 in high risk patients, and in patients whose triglyceride is more than 200, you need to use statins to lower non-HDL cholesterol to less than 130. So in patients who are very high risk and have triglycerides more than 200 and then non-HDL-C goals of less than 100 is desirable. So the class 1 recommendations for peri-procedural management includes the patients who have received a stenting during PCI for an ACS, apart from the statins, the class 1 recommendation is also for P2Y12 inhibitor, which should be for at least 12 months of clopidogrel at least 75 milligrams daily. Now, in patients who have received DES for a non-ACS indication also, clopidogrel has to be given for 12 months apart from aspirin. Hence, a DAPT is recommended for a year. Now, in patients who have received a bare metal stents for a non-ACS indication, clopidogrel has to be given for minimum of 1 month and up to 12 years can be given. These are the 2011 guidelines. So these were the old guidelines, how they had existed. And in patients with post-procedural, it was again recommended in patients if the risk of morbidity from bleeding outweighs the anticipated benefit. And then you can discontinue it early, something like at 12 months, then it would be reasonable. Again, continuation of clopidogrel, prasugrel, or ticagrelor beyond 12 months may be considered in patients undergoing placement of drug-eluting stents. Now, population-based cohort studies have clearly shown that in one of the major studies, you could find that 13,000 patients with post-angioplasty who underwent for in duration between 2002 to 2005, the 12 months of follow-up, they tracked and used the clopidogrel and CYP3A metabolizing statin and the risk of MACE. The outcomes was that the combination of both is frequently administered, and all the database that were searched, you can see that a total of 28 studies here found out that the statins, they reduce the mortality of patients administered clopidogrel. There was no difference in platelet aggregation and the expression of P-selectin, CD40 ligand, CD63, and PAC1 all were significantly reduced in the patients who were given the combination. Hence, the meta-analysis confirmed that the statins reduce mortality in patients who have already been on clopidogrel without affecting the platelet aggregation and activation. So, the antiplatelets can grossly be classified as COS1 inhibitor, P2Y12 antagonist, PD inhibitors, glycoprotein 2B3 inhibitors, and PAR1 antagonists. COX1 inhibitors is, of course, the aspirin, which we've been using for almost 100 years now. And the P2Y12 antagonists commonly used are clopidogrel, prasugrel, ticagrelor, cangrelor, and ticagrelor. So, anticlopidine. PD5 inhibitors include are recommended for secondary prevention following stroke and often in combination with aspirin. And these include dipyridamole and cilostazol. GP2B3A inhibitors include abscimab, tirofiban, and eptifibatide, but they are all intravenous during peri-procedural PCI, which were most commonly now recommended and used. PAR1 antagonist is Voraproxar and Atopexar, which are both molecules are not available in India, and they directly inhibit thrombin aggravated platelet aggravation, which is mediated through PAR1, and it inhibits it, and hence further aggravation of platelets is inhibited. Now, clopidogrel, it's though an agent now there for almost a decade. It's currently mostly high volume prescribed antiplatelet. And it was basically the Capri trial which established clopidogrel versus aspirin in the patients who had randomized of almost 20,000 patients, 10,000 in each arm for more than 2 years of follow-up, that the cardiac events actually went down when the patients were on clopidogrel as compared to aspirin. And hence, clopidogrel, which reduced CV outcomes more than aspirin, used as a secondary prevention among patients who had prior stroke or MI, came and found its place in management. But there are now issues with aspirin too. Now, various lab parameters which have assessed the efficacy of aspirin, like bleeding time, platelet reactivity, thromboxane production, and platelet aggravation, all have shown that aspirin resistance exists almost in 5 to 45% of the patients. Aspirin resistance is defined when the ability of aspirin is inhibit the COX1 dependent thromboxane A2 production and then becomes very low, which is around 1 to 2%. But estimates suggest that 30% of the treated individuals have inadequate response to aspirin treatment at doses less than 300 milligrams per day. And which includes when you go up, when you have a patient with aspirin resistance, you actually continue to have more CV events like death MI or CV stroke and closure of the vein grafts, occlusion of the peripheral grafts, and the potential mechanisms have been talked about, but the multiple, some say dose dependent, some say genetic, some say clinical, biological, absorption, pharmacokinetics, dynamics, but all of them have been assessed in various studies which I've shown here, including Ecclebome's study. And they've measured it by platelet aggregometry, where they estimate the urinary 2-dehydroxy thromboxane B2 levels, or they look at the platelet function analyzer, which is the commonest methodology. And based on that, they found out that the cellular factors, clinical factors, and genetic polymorphism all play a big role. The clinical factors would, apart from non-absorption and non-compliance, would include drug interaction with NSAIDs like ibuprofen. On top of that, the cellular factors would include erythrocyte-induced platelet activation, increased norepinephrine generation, or generation of 2-isotope PGF2 alpha. Genetic polymorphism is a very common feature. COX-1 or GP3A receptor or monovalent receptor or collagen receptors, all of may be responsible for development of aspirin resistance. Now we need to understand that basically, as compared to the aspirin, the other generation of clopidogrel, prasugrel, ticagrelor or cangrelor are basically more potent drugs. You require quick onset of action, which is very good with them. The reversibility exists only for cangrelor and ticagrelor. Prasugrel and clopidogrel both are irreversibly acting drugs. The only problem with ticagrelor, it's a BD dosage, and you know the dose, of course, along with aspirin that you need to give is much lower, up to 75 to 100 in ticagrelor. So the current guidelines for duration of DAPT, as has been mentioned in 2017, for stable coronary artery disease, and if you put a bare metal stent and the low risk of bleeding is there, so European guidelines talk about lower risk of bleeding, you can give maybe a month or more, but high risk bleeding you should not exceed more than a month. And this is what even the US guidelines are talking about. Low risk of bleeding, more than 1 month of clopidogrel, or more than one might be reasonable if not at high risk of bleeding. That's about bare metal. Or again, stable CAD, drug-eluting stents, more than 6 months of clopidogrel, and DAPT in low risk, and high risk, you have to limit it to less than 6 months. So actually, beyond 6 months, you can stop dual antiplatelets. But remember, what should you choose beyond 6 months? Maybe now there is some people who are advocating that you stop aspirin and continue clopidogrel. We'll touch upon that as I proceed in my talk. And same has been the US guidelines, which talk about discontinuation 3 months. It might be reasonable, especially if the patient has got high risk bleeding. In acute coronary syndrome, however, this duration has to be 12 months. Only in high risk bleeding patients in ACS, irrespective of these stents, you can discontinue at 6 months, which might be reasonable, as has been mentioned by US guidelines. European guidelines mention 3 to 6 months as a window. So at least 3 months in ACS, there is no choice but to give DAPT unless there is acute ongoing bleeding. Else you would prefer to give for 12 months DAPT, and then beyond 12 months, you can choose single antiplatelet. Again, there is a discussion and controversy as to which of the two antiplatelet, aspirin or clopidogrel, you would choose. The most of the guidelines still stick to aspirin beyond a year, primarily driven by the bleeding and the safety and the cost issues. But now there are data emerging otherwise for aspirin as well. Now, when you have to switch from ticagrelor to clopidogrel in Asian men in STMI, it's a time-dependent analysis was published by Ko et al. In 2020, very recently, and they investigated the effects, what happens from switching to ticagrelor to clopidogrel in Asian patients after accounting for various switching of the world over. Now, this is a single center study, but it's a retrospective cohort of almost 350 patients of ST elevation started on DAPT with ticagrelor and aspirin and maintained on Tica BD with aspirin 100. And 219 patients were switched to clopidogrel OD, and 130 who remained on Tica were on only ticagrelor group. If you compare their outcomes, which were defined as MACE major adverse cardiac events, which included all-cause mortality, MI, target vessel revasc, and ischemic stroke, and CSB, which was defined as type 2 bleeding as by the BARC definition. So first study to examine and control the variety for a switch of points of the primary objective. And they found out that when the patients were switched to actually clopidogrel, the MACE rate was lower as compared to Tica only. So the 41st encountered events were analyzed, and you can see even the bleeding risk. The Tica had slightly lesser, but this was not reaching a statistical significance. So one subject died from cardiac arrest as a second event subsequently while still on DAPT. So the two subjects had type 2 bleeds. One was epistaxis and hemoptysis as a second event. So the type 2 bleeds are more, type 1s are not more, much different from the two. So time distribution, if you look at the switches, within 4 months, most of the patients were switched. between 12 to 16, weeks, between 12 to 16 weeks, almost 50% of the patients were switched. So cumulatively looking world over, and this is what is happening even in India, that by the end of 16 weeks, which is like 4 months, almost majority of the patients, they switch from ticagrelor to clopidogrel for various reasons like cost or the side effects. So compared to TICA, the switch group was significantly associated with MACE or CCB events, which were very much matching, not reaching the statistical significance, and hence to prove, though there is a lower value, but the p-value is not significant. So this composite of bleeding and MACE actually tells you that switching is a safe strategy without losing any additional benefit of TICA that may be associated with it. So there was no significant difference when MACE were analyzed, though numbers look slightly favorable towards clopidogrel arm. And for the secondary CV safety endpoints, the switching of 70% less likely to have bleeds, significant bleeds, and this was statistically significant. So secondary outcome of CSBs only was significant. And these are the various blocks which they've looked at, various phases, and there was no significant difference across this. And again, in the 4 weekly blocks, MACE outcomes were pretty much matched. So why switching? The concerns over increasing bleeding with more potent TICA remains very common. The other side effects like dyspnea is sometimes warranting the patient to discontinue. Dyspnea is very common with ticagrelor, occurring almost in 20 to 25% of the patient. But more importantly, the clopidogrel cost is very, very low as compared to ticagrelor or prasugrel. So there was in this study no significant difference between staying on TICA versus clopidogrel, or switching might decrease the cost of actually the significant bleeds, and de-escalation from TICA to clopidogrel would translate to cost saving, which is an important factor in the Asian subcontinent. This is another study where the simultaneous administration of high dose of atorvastatin with clopidogrel was assessed during PCI. Small study of just 60 patients, where patients were given clopidogrel at the loading or at the time of PCI. And you can see there was no significant difference observed in platelet aggregation as measured by platelet aggregometry between the two arms. So statin reloading with high dose of atorvastatin and PCI appears to be safe, and there is no people used to talk that statin loading with clopidogrel loading may interfere with clopidogrel, but that's not the case as been shown in the study. There are other studies from Triton Timi, you can see, which was one of the largest studies which looked at the clopidogrel versus prasugrel actually. And this was one of the trials which established prasugrel superiority over clopidogrel in terms of event reductions, especially in terms of the stent thrombosis. But in this subgroup, if you look in patients with ACS undergoing PCI, use of statin was not associated with increased risk of CV events, even in clopidogrel treated patients. So the consistent results were observed when drugs were administered alone, together, and in combinations, even with PPI. So though you had patients subscribed and the results were slightly favoring for prasugrel arm, but statins or PPI did not interfere with clopidogrel's efficacy in terms of platelet inhibition. This is another study of impact of the rosuvastatin as compared in treated with DAPT. And in this trial, you had patients on atorvastatin 240 versus 134 on Rosua. And in 163 treated patients with clopidogrel, there was significantly increased risk of a high on treatment platelet reactivity, which means that probably rosuvastatin has an impact on clopidogrel induced platelet inhibition. So you have only 32% platelet reactivity on atorvastatin, but 55% platelet reactivity on rosuvastatin when you're co-administrating clopidogrel. So among patients receiving DAPT, rosuvastatin, but not atorvastatin is associated with high on treatment platelet reactivity without any influence on platelet effect of aspirin or ticagrelor. This is another subgroup analysis where again 915 patients on atorva versus rosuvastatin in 6 months, and you can look at the PRU values, which actually are much rosuvastatin versus atorvastatin. If you look, the atorvastatin offered a better P2Y12 inhibitor. So inhibition as measured by the PRU values, which is P2Y12 reaction units as measurement of ADP mediated aggregation of P2Y12 receptors of the platelets. So this finishes as to what I was trying to suggest and tell you about the significance of choosing what statin with what DAPT or SAPT as per the recent guidelines. Also, I would like to suggest and I would like to summarize the highlight from the recently virtually concluded American College of Cardiology virtual meeting, because the real Congress could not happen because of the COVID-19 thing. So I would try to, in a nutshell, bring out important studies from the ACC 2020, which was a virtual meeting, which was supposed to happen in March, but only virtual meeting could happen. Now, this is one of the trials where they looked at the atorvastatin reducing total events and various vascular beds, the SPARKLE trial. The atorvastatin prevented more than twice the number of total events than first events, with reduction of all vascular beds, whether it's CVA or total coronary or peripheral. All the events were actually significantly reduced when the patients are on atorvastatin versus placebo. So there is no doubt about it, but it again tells you that the benefits of these statins go across the board individually, even into the peripheral or the so if your patient is of stroke, you give them this, you actually prevent coronary events. You give coronary patient statins, you prevent a peripheral event. So something like that. So total events are actually also reduced. This is the lipid management strategies that in acute coronary syndromes, the patients among the tier 3 hospitals, where you can see the LDL goals that are achieved for Chinese ACS patients for LDL goals, they indicate that the patients who achieve the goal at admission versus 6 months are still very low, not more than 40, 50, 42%. So, which goes on to say there is a huge number which is still untreated to the goals. This is another study which is talking about differential effects of DAPT in patients with ACS versus ischemic heart after CABG. And this looked at the DAPT versus single antiplatelet, whether you give dual antiplatelet or single antiplatelet between ACS and stable patients, stable IHD who underwent bypass surgery. Now, of the 3,200 patients with ACS and 2,600 plus stable ischemic heart disease who underwent bypass surgery, it's very clear, it goes as on the lines of the ACS in angioplasty, that who underwent the use of DAPT was associated with lower mortality than SAPT, but this was not the case with stable CAD. So in bypass patients also, dual antiplatelet is recommended for ACS, single antiplatelet you can do, no need of clopidogrel, or maybe just clopidogrel alone without aspirin in patients who have stable ischemic heart disease. This is the differential effect of dual antiplatelet in patients with ACS. Again, the conclusion as was I was talking about, that the patients enrolled from the another registry again showed that the outcome of cardiac death at 5 years, the ACS patients who underwent CABG DAPT was associated with lower cardiac mortality as compared to single APT, but this was not the case with stable CABG. Similar results with the another study. This is another study which had looked at from a genetic perspective on the normal function of cytochrome P2C19 gene. And in patients undergoing primary PCI with normal function of this gene, clopidogrel resulted in less bleeding and no difference in net clinical benefit compared to ticagrelor or prasugrel. So if you know the genetic outcomes in these group of patients, the primary outcomes actually remain almost the same. There's no difference you choose which antiplatelet. Only in patients who are mutated for these genes, clopidogrel may fare inferior to the novel generation ticagrelor or prasugrel. This is impact of patients' reactivity in patients who were in a trial called Tropical ACS, where they looked at the BMI and the obesity and its impact. The platelet reactivity and rate of high platelet reactivity increases in both prasugrel and clopidogrel patients with as the BMI goes up. And the strategy to guide de-escalation was associated with net clinical benefit in non-overweight, which have mainly driven by reduction in bleeding actually. So you have two strategies that either you give them the high dose, dual dose, and you can de-escalate followed by 1 week of clopidogrel and PFT maintenance dose of clopidogrel or prasugrel. Both the strategies would do equally good if the patient's BMI is not high, but you'll have more bleeding if you go up on the strategies, and hence to down escalate might be a good strategy. So the platelet reactivity increases with both prasugrel and clopidogrel treated with the BMI. And in patients, guided de-escalation was significant net clinical benefit. In non-overweight patients was mainly driven by reduction in bleeding risk, and the two result strategies showed similar outcomes. Statin-induced autoimmune myopathy is another something that has been preceded and published in the same meeting. They talk about it's a very, very rare case in 2 in a million who develop autoimmune myopathies. This is exceptionally rare side effect of unknown pathogenesis, and it suggests that a statin-induced overexpression of HMG-CoA reductase in genetically susceptible patients may cause autoimmunity against HMG-CoA reductase. And this triple immunosuppressive therapy has been used to treat nearly half of these patients who develop statin-induced myopathy, which includes prednisolone, methotrexate, or mycophenolate mofetil, or IVIG, or rituximab. So 3 drugs out of these have to be used to treat statin-induced autoimmune myopathies. Thank you very much. I appreciate your attending this conference in news numbers, and I shall be open to the questions. Thank you. Yeah, so in my message box, I've received certain questions, and I'll try to answer them. Taking them one by one. Dr. Anil Agrawal has asked, once statin is prescribed, it should be continued throughout life or not? Is it so? Is what he wants to ask. Yes, usually you need to go by the guidelines and go by the indications. If you are taking it for secondary prevention, you will have to. For primary prevention, if you have certain risk factors like diabetes, uncontrolled thyroid, nephrotic syndrome, again, the lipids can go haywire. If those factors are taken into consideration, if you have brought those values under control, if you brought the uncontrolled diabetes to normal, if you brought down your thyroid levels into control, if they were uncontrolled, in those circumstances, after bringing that, if in primary prevention, if the lipid levels go below the guideline levels, you can discontinue statins with a regular follow-up and a watch on it. But in secondary prevention, there is no data and no trial to tell you that you can discontinue. So if the patient had an event, had a stroke, had ischemic heart disease, has PVD, has undergone a bypass or an angioplasty, you'll have to be on statin. But if you're looking just at lipid profiles and trying to discontinue it, make sure that you have brought down, if there are any other secondary risk factors, got them under control. And with that, if your lipids are normal, you can try and look at the discontinuation and again follow it up if the lipids don't jump back to abnormal limits. Dr. Parth Patel has asked, what is the recent concept of giving anti-lipids in MI? Is it hydrostatin for long-term or short-term? A good question, Parth. This is your first question. You have 2 questions actually. Second question is, dual antiplatelet are given for 1 year. So I'll answer the first question first. Yes, antilipids, you need to understand that in acute MI, usually when you do a lipids, usually lipids will be lower than what they have been for years. There's a concept of lipid load in life, which is like if your total cholesterol or your LDL cholesterol has been say 200 at 1 year and then another 200 for next year and then 120 and then, so you sum it up. Once these levels cross a basic threshold, you'll get an MI. So I think an MI is actually warranting to bring down the risk of secondary events beyond the occurrence of the MI itself. And for that reason, it's important that you do give them high dose of statins. What do you mean by high dose statins? Is that once that you get an acute MI, your LDLs do come below 70, they say. And in very high risk, you bring it down below 55. Now, I feel for every Indian, it should be below 55, not below 70. Because Indians by genetic per se, by their genetic milieu, are high risk individuals. And once you bring that down below 55, you have to continue to do that. You'll have to use high dose statin only. If the patient is statin intolerant, you can add ezetimibe, or you can choose PCSK9 in 2 indications. Once you have recurrence, PCSK9 is evolocumab, which is like a recombinant monoclonal antibody. What they do is that they bring down the lipid levels or the LDL levels to less than 50% of the baseline. Now, where I use PCSK9 on top of statins as the subgroup where the patient has got primary familial hyperlipidemia. So in this type of dyslipidemias, these patients are not going to come back. I have patients who would have had LDLs of 500s and 400s. There's no way that high dose statins and ezetimibe alone is going to bring it down. And these patients, you'll have to give them PCSK9. So yes, high dose is the rule. And once you've done and brought that down beyond 3 months, then you can think according to the tolerance to bring it down or not. Dual antiplatelet have to be in Indian scenario for a year. Unless the patient bleeds beyond 3 months, as I showed the American guidelines, you can try to bring it down. but otherwise they should be continued. For a year and then you can discontinue. So there were some negative trials actually, Aspire for aspirin, where primary prevention and even secondary prevention is now getting questionable for aspirin. And then that's the reason where clopidogrel can actually pitch in and produce its place or take it over. Because aspirin in patients in primary prevention has failed miserably. Except in patients, so aspirin a day keeps the doctor away is no more true. Aspirin should not be given for primary prevention unless the patient is high risk, diabetic, male with low GI risk bleeding. So that's very rare scenario. So aspirin to everyone is out of question. Secondary prevention you may choose, but I really have my doubts with data coming in from newer generation of P2 antagonist like Pegasus, where they talk of ticagrelor, which tells you that ticagrelor should be the only antiplatelet beyond a year and not aspirin. Instead of aspirin alone beyond a year of ACS, you give ticagrelor 60 milligram BD, not 90 milligram BD, and you can bring down the event rates. Extrapolating the same logic, I think somebody needs to do a study, of course there's no data, that once you switch them instead of aspirin to clopidogrel, maybe the outcomes may be better. Thank you, if that explains your question. So there's the next question from Dr. Manish Agrawal. What incidence of statin-induced diabetes? Now, this is good question. There's something called as new onset diabetes, NOD, as has been called by statins. Incidence has been mentioned in the range of 5 to 6%. That means that 5 to 6% of pre-diabetics or non-diabetics would develop diabetes over a period of 3 to 5 years. Now, this is there was a lot of noise about it, but you have to understand that new onset of diabetes is not diabetes per se caused by statins. Statins actually unmask and bring it a decade earlier than the patient was to get even otherwise. It just brings it earlier. And the benefits that you get of giving statins in these group of patients are going to prevent, say, 20 events. By giving statin, you produce 5 diabetes, of which over 10 years, you'll get 1 event. So that fear of statin-induced diabetes should not discourage you to put patients who are pre-diabetic, borderline diabetic, family history of diabetes to be started on statins. There is another question. All diabetics should get aspirin. I don't think so. All diabetics should get aspirin again. Secondary prevention, yes. Primary prevention, maybe, maybe not. High risk, you'll have to assess every patient for 2 things. One, their bleeding risk, and second, the CV risk. If their CV risk, the Q risk is very high, and their bleeding risk is low, and the patient is a chronic diabetic with symptoms and stable CAD, maybe yes. Normal coronaries documented with low risk of CV risk or high bleeding risk, I would still not be giving. But diabetes per se is a very bad disease to have. So if you're not going to be that screening for all these analysis for the risk profile, then maybe diabetes as a blanket for males may be a good answer to have. Dr. V.S. Ramprasad has asked, after bypass, what is the dosage of statin and clopidogrel given and for how many days? Both aspirin and clopidogrel for a year. For statins, you have to give high dose. Now, there are trials that even post bypass, even patients had more atrial fibrillation if they were not given statins perioperatively. So even post bypass, statins prevent nephropathy, atrial fibrillation, recurrence of event rates, stroke limitations, and that's why, but the surgeons actually fear myopathy so much that they don't give statins acute phase. So what I and my surgeon had reached a compromise was that we discharge them on statin. If they don't want me to actually be giving it immediate post CBG, they should be given statin before they are sent home. Dr. K.M. Mishra has asked, atorvastatin, rosuvastatin, which is your preferable? And if triglyceride is very high, what is the role of fenofibrates? Yeah, so how I do, I mean, see, goal is you can choose either, I would say, but there is an issue, as I was saying, with the drug interaction. There are a couple of issues between the 2 statins. One, vitamin D. Vitamin D is required for atorvastatin for prevention of its for prevention of statin-induced myopathy and also its activation. So vitamin D is an important aspect with atorvastatin, not so much with rosuvastatin. Number two, rosuvastatin has an issue in terms of drug interaction, as I showed with clopidogrel, which is not the case with atorvastatin. Number three, atorvastatin is sometimes better tolerated as compared to rosuvastatin when you try to dose escalate, which is like 40 milligram rosua may not be as well tolerated as 80 of atorva. So when you're looking at high dosages, probably atorva does better. What I do, most of the data for secondary prevention is of atorvastatin, not of rosuvastatin. So in secondary prevention, I prefer atorvastatin only in patients. Number rosuvastatin has got data for good data, very good data for primary prevention, and not only primary prevention, but even regression of plaque. That data does not exist for atorvastatin. So primary prevention, where the plaques are to be regressed and managed medically, I give rosuvastatin. That's how I differentiate. Role of fibrates, yes, if your TG levels continue to remain more than 200, despite full dose of statin, you might have to go in and add fibrates. Even in the trials that have been done with triglycerides, even a CORD trial, it showed that if your TGs were more than 228, then it was always better to go chase 3G rather than not only just be chasing the LDLs. So even in ACCORD trial, the lipid arm, the 228 was the cutoff where the fibrates actually started showing event reduction. So I would be first chasing the non-triglyceride lipids, which is your primary LDL and HDL. Look at the LDL, try to bring it down to the goal, and then think about where you are with the triglyceride, and then maybe add fibrates. Prevention in ACS in diabetic patients is the other question. Role of aspirin for primary prevention in ACS in diabetic patients, Dr. Pavan has asked, Dr. Pavan Acharya. I think this was the same question. For high-risk diabetics, for patients with low GI risk bleeds, chronic diabetics, or established CVD, you'll have to give. So suppose patient has got angiography and 30% blockages in coronary, you would still give him aspirin because it's established CVD, though non-obstructive in nature. Dr. Krishna Kumar Mishra has asked, in alcoholic liver disease with ischemic heart disease, what's the role of statin and litter, especially when there is deranged liver function? Yeah. So as long as your SGOTs and SGPTs are not more than 3 times the normal limit, so usually 2 digits, I continue to give statins, though slightly lower dosages. And I prefer to add ezetimibe to attain LDL goals. So I usually go by 10 atorva, 10 ezetimibe in such kind of patients. And I keep a close watch on LDL, on the SGOTs. Remember, in acute MI, your liver enzymes are going to be deranged anyway. So they may not be because of liver disease per se. But as you said, this is alcoholic, or say it's a hepatitis itself or a fatty liver itself. Then if the markers are more than 3 times normal limit, then I would be very gentle and very low with statins and prefer instead to give ezetimibe along with it. Other option, of course, would be to give PCSK9 if the patient can't tolerate. And Dr. Kishan Yadav has asked statins in CKD patients. Now, again, this is a good question. Rosuvastatin and rhabdomyolysis both actually become very high in patients with CKD. Most of the CKD patients are vitamin D deficient as well. And that's why when you are giving a statin in CKD, it has to be along with good amount of supplementation of vitamin D. So you have to, my preference is to give them atorvastatin with vitamin D. I again give low dosages because they are more prone to fibromyalgia, to the not only myalgias, but even myositis and myopathies, and rhabdomyolysis can also happen in CKD patients. So you have to be very cautious with them, but I usually give atorvastatin, lower dosages combined with ezetimibe and good supplementation of vitamin D. There's another question. Do all diabetics should receive statins? Yeah. Aspirin, maybe no, but statins, yes. In CARDS trial, it was clearly shown that diabetics, irrespective of their duration, lipid management, lipid values, duration of diabetes, duration of therapies, what drugs they were on, irrespective of that, every diabetic who received statin versus those who did not had 16% reduction in MACE. So all diabetics may or may not receive aspirin, but all diabetics must receive statin. Dr. Atul Parikh has asked, in cirrhotic patients, how do we manage antiplatelet post-angioplasty? Sir, as I said, mostly these patients, I would put on DAPT if the patient is an ACS. In cirrhotic, you need to be understanding two aspects. One is ticagrelor requires activation, requires both liver and renal functions to be good. If both of them are hampered or either of them is hampered, tica, you need to be a bit cautious. Secondly, prasugrel is very potent in terms of bleeding. So if the patient is cirrhotic, he can have a variceal bleed. So in these group of patients, if the patient is really terminal cirrhotic, you will usually give with clopidogrel with aspirin. If the patient is in ACS, post-angioplasty, 3 months and stop aspirin and continue clopidogrel. This is what the strategy we usually adopt, but there are no clear-cut guidelines as to cirrhotic with antiplatelet post-PTCA. As to how you do, you'll have to assess individually every patient for the risk of bleed and the risk of thrombosis. But grossly speaking, 3 months DAPT and beyond 3 months, only clopidogrel is what we usually do. Acute bleeds, you'll have to discontinue both maybe and then re-challenge with at least one of the drugs or either of the two drugs, which usually people do with clopidogrel because it's more potent and less likely to cause ulcerative GI bleeds, which aspirin people fear as one of the known risk factors for GI erosions and also erosions of the varices itself. So that's my strategy for cirrhotics in patients requiring DAPT post-angioplasty. There's another question from Dr. Ankit Kataria. Preference for rosuvastatin over in patients of stable CKD. Yes, I mean, rosuvastatin, the simple reason, as I mentioned, if you're giving low dose, you can choose either, but you would always prefer to make sure that the patients don't end up with rhabdomyolysis. These are more prone to rhabdomyolysis. I would always go with atorvastatin with vitamin D supplementation with low dosage with monitoring. But you can choose low dose Rosuva also. It is pretty fine. But if most of the nephrologists, you'll see the incidence of rhabdomyolysis is more with rosuvastatin as compared to atorvastatin if the vitamin D levels are well maintained. So my choice is usually atorvastatin, but there's no absolutely blue or red line or green or red zone that you can't use rosuvastatin. Prefer is to use atorvastatin. Thank you very much. I think I've done all the questions. If there are no more questions, Dr. Veena, do you have any more questions from the audience that you can share with me?
I think we are done with the question answer session, sir. And
Pankaj, Pritam, there are more questions that I
Pankaj?
No, sir, there is no more questions. I think we have done with the questions also. Thank you very much, sir, for your excellent and scientific scintillating deliberations.
Thank you.
I would thanks from my core of heart and for your support and the execution of the same, sir. We are also very much thankful for our audience, sir, who had made this even in their tough
huge audience,
schedule, during this COVID time, sir.
Yeah, I understand some 1,300 registrations.
Yeah, sir. So it is a very good number, sir. I hope this people have given a good time here, sir. And I appreciate, sir, because this scientific update is our responsibility. So we try to make it as much as possible, sir. We understand all are having a very tough time today, sir. I would also like to thank my HO team, medical team. Dr. Veena is there, sir. She has given a lot of time for all these deliberations. I also would like to thank my entire seniors as well as my field team who has tried as much as clarity can be given before the talk also, sir. I would also like to thank all the backstage team who have made this possible. So my sincere thanks, wholehearted thanks to all the people who have been part of this. And once again, a very thanks from my core of heart. Sir, I think we should call it a day. So good night all. Good night all doctors, and stay safe and have a good time, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you all.